Good morning, fellow Neverwinter players. Today I'm going to be talking about the Paladin. I have two separate builds that I'm going to talk about. I'm going to talk about some optionality. There's definitely some optionality in both the tank side and the healing side of the Paladin. Uh, I am not going to be talking about equipment or powers or attribute points or companions or boons or mount insignias in this video. Um, that's pretty much tried and true, and it's pretty much the same for all healing and tank classes, or for those roles. So there's not a lot of variation there, but I am going to talk a little bit about some of the variation that you can have when running the tank and the healer, a paladin. I'm going to start off with the healing build here. So I'm going to pop straight at wills. So I'm using Valorious Strike and Radiant Slam. Generally speaking, I avoid cure wounds. The heal magnitude's not very good on it. It doesn't erect barriers. Um, it's just generally meh. It's just not worth slotting. And then Divine Fulmination can be fun if you're running solo. It does a decent hit. It's just its cast time is so bloody slow. But it is a ranged power, and it can be kind of nice in a solo scenario. But generally speaking, if you're in a group, because of the long cast time, you want to avoid it. And this build really depends on frequent and fast hits. So Valorious Strike is kind of my go-to. But then again, Radiant Slam for kind of AoE situations. What I have slotted for counter powers right now is more kind of a solo type of thing. If I'm actually going to be running the content, in a party and healing, I'm going to be running Divine Touch. I always keep Smite on, and then I do, if I'm running like an AoE dungeon, do throw in Divine Shelter. I generally steer clear of Divine Shelter because it costs a lot of Divinity, um, but it does have a decent magnitude heal, and it has a good range. And if your group is scattered, this can be the difference between a success and a fail. Uh, but your go-to heal is going to be Divine Touch. That's going to be the touch you're going to use 95% of the time. Uh, and then from an optionality perspective, Smite's a really good one for, again, some more personal DPS. And then, in Tom runs, you might want to be running Bond of Virtue on a tank to increase the heals on the tank. Or in scenarios where, you have some ability to kind of stand still, Circle of Divinity. The one thing to remember about Circle of Divinity, though, is you throw it down and it's static, and it has a pretty long cooldown. It can definitely be worthwhile in certain scenarios, but generally speaking, it's just not fantastic. And then the other encounter power I kind of want to call out here is Cleansing Touch. Cleansing Touch will remove negative conditions, but it is a targeted, so and it but it does have a relatively low divinity cost. So there's times where you want to remove, a negative condition, like so in an ME, or there's some dungeons that apply negative conditions that you can remove that on. From a daily perspective, again, right now what I have slotted is more for personal DPS for just running around solo. But if I'm in a dungeon, generally speaking, I'll run Shield of Faith and Lay on Hands. Although Sanctuary is also a pretty decent daily with the heals on it. Um, and so, like, you may use this in the second boss, for example, in Lair of the Mad Mage. Lay on Hands, though, is a really good targeted heal, um, and it does erect that Divine Barrier as well. And then, of course, for personal DPS, Divine Judgment. From a class feature perspective, this is where it gets a little stickier. Um, when I'm running in party content, I like to run Composure. So I'm generating Divinity faster. Remember, Divinity is heals, essentially. And then I like running Timely Intervention. Um, So, timely intervention kind of negates some of the power of the paladin um, in the Divine Barriers, but it can be a complete and utter lifesaver. I mean, when you're running solo, though, you could run some other feats in here, and really, there's really only a couple of these class features that are really not situationally very good. Most of them are pretty good, and just get a feel for what you like to run. But I suggest, especially starting out, that you do run timely intervention to get some bigger heals when your party members are a little low, and you get that extra divinity gain. From a feat perspective, there are really two must-have feats on this list for a paladin healer, and it's kind of the bread and butter for erecting large barriers. That first one is critical touch. So when you're using an at-will power, you have a 10% chance to bestow the effect of critical touch, which guarantees that your next divine touch, remember we're talking about divine touch up here, uh, it it guarantees that that's going to crit. So you're going to have a crit heal on that divine touch. And then when it activates, it's not only going to pop a message up, but it's going to have like a little dotted bar, and it's going to be kind of a slightly different color on divine touch down in your power bar. Uh, and then I'm going to look at the second run. I've gone both ways on this, and I think these are both good options. I tend to run Divine Focus. So whenever you channel Divinity, you gain Divine Focus. It may stack up to 10 times. Upon reaching 10 stacks of Divine Focus, you gain the effect of Focused Action, causing your at-will powers to restore Divinity when used. So it depends on your playstyle. Remember, as a paladin healer, you're not going to be doing a lot of heals. You're going to be doing a lot of at wills because you want to proc that critical touch, and then you want to time out your heals. And remember that the divine barriers, when you raise them on a player, they last for 10 seconds. So the idea is you're over healing the player, giving them a blue bar, then you got 10 seconds, about 10 seconds to use your at wills to again get that critical touch, and then throw another big heal on your players, keeping that blue bar up, hopefully never dipping into their actual hit points. um, a prayer of opportunity, that's where you're going to be frequently channeling divinity, so you're pausing to get channel divinity. I think the divine focus has a little better synergy with again critical touch, and then emissary warding, your two must-have feats. Uh, I like running, so for this column, I like running Spirit of Austerity. So this is reducing both the magnitude of my smite, but also the cost of smite, right? So it significantly lowers the cost of using smite, and I use this just for some personal DPS. That being said, Enduring Spirit can be really nice too if you're having trouble holding Divinity up on your uh, when you're healing. You may want to actually go this route and then mix Sacred Weapon into your encounter rotation. And then Divine Intervention versus Convalescence. I'm not a big fan of Convalescence because I'm finding that in situations where I would erect Shield of Faith, I'm already overhealing, so I don't want to take away those blue bars from people. So I run Divine Intervention. So when I use Lay on Hands, I'm now making that barrier even bigger on that person I'm healing. And of course, the last must-have feat for this build is Emissary Warding. So whenever you generate a Divine Barrier and you heal critically, you're doubling the effect of that barrier. I've seen players have completely full blue bars due to the combination of critical touch and emissary warding. So you're talking about a player running 350,000 hit points, now having another 350,000 hit point buffer, and that can really make dungeon runs go a lot smoother. So I'm going to flip over to the tank, and there's even more like variety in the tank. So from an at-will power, again, I like running Valorious Strike. It's a nice fast hit, but my secondary is Oath Strike. Now, the reason I run Oath Strike is it helps me hold threat on targets. So this is kind of like my main go-to. If I'm having no problem keeping threat and holding threat, I'll use Valorious Strike, maybe for personal DPS. But I throw Oath Strike in if, especially in AoE scenarios or like in Tower of the Mad Mage, I'll run an Oath Strike just to make sure I'm holding that threat. And then when it's not my turn as a tank in Tower of the Mad Mage, I will run Valorious Strike instead, so I'm not increasing my threat and pulling the threat away from the tank that's supposed to have it. From a just running around, I do run Burning Light. But if I'm in there tanking, it depends on whether I'm tanking AoE or I'm tanking solo target stuff. So if I'm targeting solo target, I will run Vow of Enmity, I'll run Smite, and generally speaking, I'll run Absolution. Especially in Tom, I mix Absolution in, especially when I'm about to take like the fourth or fifth or sixth Annihilation hit in a row if I'm solo tanking. Um, but from running around solo, I generally use Relentless Avengers, Burning Light, and again Smite. Smite, I'm really a big fan of Smite. It never comes off my build. I know some people are a fan of Bane. I don't run Bane at all. I just think the Divinity cost is too high, and I'm just not a fan of how it works. If you're running in AoE situations, again, I keep Smite on my thing because it does great DPS. But I find that Templar's Wrath, especially. So one thing I'm gonna kind of go out here for a limb for a second, kind of get off in counter powers. You need to be building your tank to be fast. There are groups that want to run content. As a tank, you need to be making an effort to stay at the front edge of the group and engaging content first. Don't be the tank that sits behind and waits for everyone else. As a tank, your job is to be out front and engage first, get the threat, turn the mobs, give your group combat advantage. So enough preaching for now. So Templar's Wrath is a great way to do that. It does cost a bit of divinity, but you can pop in there, use Templar's Wrath on the mob, go to the backside of the mob, throw your shield up, take some hits, start using Oath Strike in there, or Smite, and keep that going. From a daily perspective, I do like running Divine Judgment when I'm running solo, as well as Radiant Charge. When I'm in group content, I still keep Divine Judgment up because there's just times where I can just use it and it does a really great amount of damage. But I'm a big fan of Shield of Faith. Um, I think it's better. For my personal perspective, is I think Shield of Faith is better than Divine Protector, and that's why I do that. And I really haven't found a great use of for heroism, though there are definitely cases where that increase to your maximum hit points can really be useful. Um, Tower of the Mad Mage comes to mind, and a few other places. From a class feature perspective, again, there's a lot of optionality in here. I like keeping composure on. Remember, my threat is all based on, except for when I'm running Vow of Enmity, my threat is based entirely on having that divinity and being able to use Smite. Because I am also using Divine Challenger, which grants Smite the added effect of placing me at the top of my target list, right? So I have Vow of Enmity, and then I use Smite to really ensure that I've got a solid lock on that target, and I'm getting threat, and then Oath Strike. So it's all about generating threat. My job is not necessarily to do any sort of damage at all. Again, generate threat, be the target for the enemy, take the hits, and then rely on my healer to heal me if that becomes an issue. From a feat perspective, I do run Sacred Shield, so especially when I'm running solo, I'll throw in Sacred Weapon. There are some scenarios where if it's lighter hitting, again, I'll throw Sacred Weapon in. So now I've got another, threat generation mechanic where I could be running Vow of Enmity, Smite, and Sacred Weapon, which are all generating threat. So it gives me another choice. And plus, I really am not a big fan of Divine Reciprocation because I'm not a healer. Generally speaking, I don't need to worry about running divine touch. It's really not necessary. So I just kind of leave that one alone. Uh, this this next row, I don't use Bane, so I'm not going to feed for it. So I have Burning Vengeance, and again I use Burning Light when I'm running solo. So that was kind of the feed I went with. This next one is kind of down to your play style, right? So again, my play style is I come in, I generate threat, and I take hits. Um, I found that the divinity gain on both of these is kind of lackluster. I'm not really I'm not really crazy about the divinity gain on the paladin, especially in scaled content. In unscaled content, like Tower of the Mad Mage, You throw your shield up, and I can take a single hit from like an annihilation ball, and my divinity is completely full. So, and running Justice Bulwark or an 80 content, I find the divinity gain is much better. In 70 scaled content, this one just doesn't work very well, and then you're generally probably going to be better with Divine Pursuit. Again, it comes down to play style. And then for this row here, um, again, I don't like running Divine Protector. I don't find it to be as effective as Shield of Faith. So um, I'm running Sheltering Light. So whenever I'm healed, um, party members under the effect of my Shield of Faith, so now let's say I have Shield of Faith up, are healed for 50% of the value I was healed for. So if I've got a big heal coming on me, I've got Shield of Faith up, all my party members are getting healed too. And then for the last row, there's Intimidating Presence or Unyielding Champion. I find that I have no problem maintaining threat on my Paladin. So I run Unyielding Champion, which really gives my tab mechanic uh, a little extra oomph. Whereas if I were running Intimidating Presence, that I might use if I'm having trouble maintaining threat. So if I'm in a content where I'm just, as a paladin, I'm not maintaining threat, this is probably the route I'm going to go instead. But generally speaking, for party tanking scenarios, I prefer Unyielding Champion, and that's kind of the route I go. So that's all I have for the Paladin for today. If you have any questions, comments, critiques, hit me up on my Twitch channel or leave a comment here in the video. Thanks for watching, and have a great day.